Everyone in Umudim laughed at Adesuwa because she was not the kind of woman the village expected her to be. She was tall, strong, muscular, and more comfortable under the hood of a car than sitting quietly in a dress waiting for a husband. They mocked her body, insulted her dreams, and said no man would ever love a woman who worked like a mechanic. But Adesuwa had never been weak. After a tragic fire took her father, destroyed their home, and left her with nothing but grief and grease-stained hands, she refused to disappear. While others pitied her, judged her, and waited for her to fail, Adesuwa kept working. She fixed motorcycles, repaired broken engines, and held her head high in a village that wanted her to feel ashamed for being different. Then one afternoon, a billionaire's Rolls-Royce broke down on the dusty road outside her small Enugu village. The rich man's drivers panicked. His assistants made calls. Everyone stared at the luxury car as if it were too expensive for ordinary hands to touch. But Adesuwa stepped forward, wiped her hands on a rag, opened the hood, and became the only person in the village who knew exactly what was wrong. She thought it was just another repair. She had no idea that fixing one broken car would expose betrayal, open the door to a life she never imagined, and lead her to a love story no one in Umudim saw coming. The woman they mocked for being too strong was about to become the woman they all wished they had believed in. Her shoulders were broad, her arms thick with muscle, and her hands rough from years of hard labor. While most women her age spent their days selling food in the market, braiding hair, or helping on family farms, Adesuwa spent her days covered in engine oil. Whenever she walked through the village square, conversations would stop, heads would turn, whispers would follow. There goes the village wrestler. Look at her arms. Are you sure she's a woman? Who will marry someone like that? Laughter usually followed. Some people didn't even bother whispering. They said it loudly enough for her to hear. First, those words had hurt. Very badly. When she was younger, she used to cry herself to sleep after hearing the insults. She would stare at her reflection and wonder why she couldn't look like the other girls. Why couldn't she be small and delicate? Why couldn't she have soft hands and slim arms? Why did people always make her feel like there was something wrong with her? But over the years, she learned to hide her pain. Now, she simply ignored them. At least she tried to. One bright morning, Adesuwa walked through the market carrying a heavy gearbox on one shoulder. The gearbox weighed more than many of the bags the traders struggled to lift, yet Adesuwa carried it as if it weighed nothing. A group of young women selling vegetables watched her pass. One of them burst into laughter. Look at her. Another shook her head. If I looked like that, I would never leave my house. The women laughed loudly. Adesuwa kept walking. She didn't respond. She didn't even look at them, but inside, their words still stung. No matter how many times she heard them, the pain never completely disappeared. When she finally reached the mechanic workshop at the edge of the village, her expression softened. This place felt like home. The small workshop was old and worn, but it held some of her happiest memories. Old engines lay scattered around the compound. Used tires leaned against the walls. Metal tools hung from wooden shelves. And standing beneath the shade of a large mango tree was her father, Chukwudi. The moment he saw her, he smiled. You're late. Adesuwa laughed. I had to stop and buy the spare parts you requested. Chukwudi nodded approvingly. Good. He pointed toward a damaged pickup truck. The owner wants it fixed before evening. No problem. Together, father and daughter got to work. For years, this had been their routine. Many people found it strange that Chukwudi had taught his daughter mechanics instead of teaching a son. But Chukwudi never cared about people's opinions. He believed skill mattered more than tradition. When he was 12 years old, she had wandered into his workshop out of curiosity. She had watched him repair an engine. Then she started asking questions. Lots of questions. Most children would have become bored after a few minutes, became fascinated. Within months, she could identify dozens of engine parts. Within a year, she could assist with repairs. As she grew older, she became even more skilled. Now, at 22, she could diagnose vehicle problems faster than many trained mechanics. Sometimes customers were shocked when they discovered that the person fixing their cars was a woman, an extremely muscular woman. But their surprise usually disappeared after seeing her work. New engines, and she knew them well. That afternoon, while repairing the pickup truck, she slid beneath the vehicle and quickly identified the problem, a damaged suspension component. She called out the issue to her father. Chukwudi grinned. Correct. Smiled proudly. Even now, she still enjoyed earning his approval. A few hours later, They finished the repair. The grateful owner paid them and drove away happily. As the sun began setting over the village, father and daughter sat beneath the mango tree. The evening breeze drifted through the workshop. Birds sang in the distance. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then spoke. "Papa, yes?" She hesitated. "I heard people laughing at me again today." Chukwudi sighed. He already knew where the conversation was heading. What did they say this time? The usual things. She stared at the ground. "They said I look like a man. They said nobody will ever marry me. They laughed because I was carrying the gearbox." Chukwudi remained silent for a moment. Then he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Adise, look at me." She lifted her eyes. "You know why people laugh?" She shrugged. "Because I'm different." "No." His voice was firm. "They laugh because they don't understand you." Adise listened quietly. "Most people fear what they don't understand," he continued. "You are strong. You are talented. You can do things many of them cannot do. Some people admire that. Others feel threatened by it." She looked doubtful. "It doesn't feel like admiration." Chukwudi chuckled. "Perhaps not. But one day you will realize something." "What?" "The opinions of people who do nothing with their lives are worthless." Adise laughed despite herself. Her father always knew how to make her smile. He leaned back in his chair. "When your mother was alive, people laughed at me too." Adise looked surprised. "They did?" "Oh yes. Why?" "Because I married a woman who sold spare parts." Adise laughed. "That's ridiculous." "Exactly." He pointed at her. "And someday you'll realize that what people say about you is just as ridiculous." The laughter slowly faded from her face. "I miss Mama." Chukwudi's expression softened. "So do I." Adise had been only 10 years old when her mother passed away after a brief illness. Since then, her father had become her entire world. He was her parent, her teacher, her protector, and her best friend. They sat together in silence as the sun disappeared behind the hills. The sky glowed orange and gold. Finally, Chikiti stood. "Come. Where are we going?" He picked up a toolbox. "I want to teach you something." Her eyes lit up immediately. "What is it?" "A new engine system." Adiez jumped to her feet. Suddenly, all thoughts of the villagers disappeared. The teasing, the insults, the laughter, none of it mattered because she was doing what she loved. As father and daughter walked deeper into the workshop, neither of them knew that their lives were about to change forever. Neither knew that tragedy was quietly waiting around the corner. Neither knew that the lessons Chikiti was teaching his daughter would soon become the only thing she had left of him. But on that evening, none of that mattered. There was only a father sharing his knowledge and a daughter eager to learn. For the first time that day, Adiez smiled without sadness. The villagers could laugh all they wanted. They could mock her muscles. They could question her future. They could doubt her dreams. One day, she would prove them wrong. She just didn't know how soon that day would come. The rainy season arrived early that year. Dark clouds hung over the village of Umidem almost every afternoon, and the dusty roads had become muddy paths that villagers carefully navigated. For Adiez, however, the rain changed very little. Every morning, she still woke up before sunrise. She still helped her father open the workshop, and she still spent her days fixing engines and repairing vehicles. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. As long as her father was beside her, she felt she could survive anything. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the workshop, Chukwudi handed Adiza a small list. "We're running low on supplies," he said. Adiza wiped grease from her hands. "What do we need?" "Engine oil, spark plugs, and kerosene." She nodded. "The shop near the market should still be open." Chukwudi smiled. "Good. Go before the rain starts." Adiza grabbed a small bag and headed toward the village market. As she walked away, she glanced back at the workshop. Her father was locking away some tools. He noticed her looking. "Why are you staring at me?" he asked with a laugh. Adiza grinned. "Just making sure you don't break anything while I'm gone." Chukwudi laughed loudly. "Go before I change my mind and make you carry an engine block home." She laughed and continued down the road. Neither of them knew those would be the last words they would ever exchange. The market was unusually busy. Farmers hurried to finish their business before the rain arrived. Women rushed between stalls, carrying baskets on their heads. Children ran through puddles while their mothers shouted after them. Adiza quickly bought the supplies and placed them in her bag. As she prepared to leave, a low rumble echoed through the sky. Thunder. The first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, the drizzle became a downpour. The rain hammered rooftops and turned the road into mud. Most people took shelter. Adesuwa stood beneath the roof of a small shop and waited. She had always enjoyed watching rainstorms. There was something peaceful about them, but tonight felt different. A strange uneasiness settled inside her chest. She couldn't explain it. After nearly 30 minutes, the rain finally weakened. Adesuwa adjusted the bag on her shoulder and started toward home. The village roads were almost empty now. Only a few lanterns glowed in the darkness. As she approached her neighborhood, she noticed something unusual. People were running, shouting, screaming. At first, she couldn't understand what was happening. Then she saw it. A bright orange glow lighting up the night sky. Her heart skipped a beat. The glow was coming from the direction of her home. No, her pace quickened. Then she started running. The closer she got, the louder the screams became. Smoke filled the air. Villagers crowded the road ahead. Some carried buckets of water. Others shouted instructions. Adesuwa pushed through the crowd. Then she saw it. Her house. It was on fire. Flames exploded from the windows. The roof was already collapsing. The entire building was engulfed. For a moment, her brain refused to accept what her eyes were seeing. No. The bag slipped from her hands. The supplies scattered across the muddy ground. No. She ran toward the house. People immediately grabbed her. Adesuwa, don't go in there. Stop. She fought against them. My father is inside. Terror consumed her. She could barely breathe. She struggled with every ounce of strength she possessed. But several men held her back. Let me go. Tears streamed down her face. Papa. The fire roared louder. The heat was unbearable even from a distance. Adesuwa screamed his name again. No answer came. Only the crackling sound of burning wood. A section of the roof suddenly collapsed inward. The crowd gasped. Adesuwa's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Deep inside, she already knew, but she refused to believe it. Her father had survived so much. He couldn't be gone. Not like this. Not tonight. Not while she was away. For hours the villagers fought the fire. They formed lines carrying buckets from a nearby stream, but it wasn't enough. The flames had spread too quickly. By midnight, the house was nothing more than a smoldering skeleton. Smoke rose into the night sky. Ash drifted through the air like black snow. Adesuwa sat in the mud staring at the ruins, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to cry anymore. Everything felt numb. The village chief eventually approached her. His face was heavy with sadness. Adesuwa. She looked up slowly. Several men stood behind him. None of them could meet her eyes. That was when she knew her father had not survived. The reality hit her harder than any physical blow. A sound escaped her throat, a broken, heartbreaking sound. Then she collapsed to her knees. The world blurred around her. People tried to comfort her, but their words meant nothing. Her father was gone. The man who had raised her. The man who had believed in her when nobody else did. The man who had taught her everything she knew. Gone. And now, there was nothing left. Not even a home. The following days passed like a nightmare. Villagers helped to arrange the funeral. Friends and neighbors came to pay their respects. Many brought food. Many offered condolences. Adesuwa barely heard any of it. She moved through each day, as though she were trapped inside a dream. At the funeral, she stood beside her father's grave wearing a simple black dress. Rain clouds filled the sky. The same kind of clouds that had hung overhead the night he died. As the final prayers were said, tears rolled silently down her face. She remembered every lesson he had taught her, every joke he had made, every moment they had shared. Most of all, she remembered his words. They laugh because they don't understand strength. The memory shattered her. When the burial ended, the crowd slowly dispersed. One by one, people returned to their lives, but Adesuwa had no life to return to. Her house was gone. Her father was gone. Her future suddenly felt uncertain. That evening, she walked back to the burned remains of her home. Ash covered everything. The walls were blackened. The roof had completely collapsed. Nothing remained. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned and looked toward the workshop. The workshop had survived. The flames had not reached it. It was now the only thing she had left. Slowly, she walked inside. The familiar smell of engine oil greeted her. Tools still hung where her father had left them. A half-repaired engine sat on a workbench. Everything looked exactly the same, yet everything had changed. Adesuwa sat in her father's chair. For the first time since the funeral, she broke down completely. She cried until her chest hurt. She cried until she had no tears left. That night, she slept on a worn-out mattress in the corner of the workshop. The next morning, she woke to the sound of birds. For a few seconds, she forgot what had happened. Then reality returned. She was alone, completely alone. Weeks passed. Life became difficult, very difficult. Some villagers helped where they could. Others simply watched. A few still mocked her, even after her loss. One afternoon, she overheard two women whispering near the workshop. Poor girl. Yes, but who would have thought she'd end up homeless? That's what happens when a woman behaves like a man. Adesuwa clenched her fists. The words hurt, but this time something inside her had changed. She was tired of letting people's opinions define her. She had already lost the most important person in her life. Nothing those women said could hurt more than that. Instead of responding, she returned to her work because work was all she had left. Every vehicle she repaired reminded her of her father. Every engine she fixed carried his lessons. Every customer she helped kept his legacy alive. Slowly, the workshop began attracting more customers. Word spread that Adesuwa was just as skilled as her father. Some even claimed she was better. The praise didn't erase her grief, but it gave her purpose. One evening, as the sun set over Enugu, Adesuwa stood outside the workshop and looked toward the horizon. The pain was still there, the loneliness was still there, but beneath it, something else was growing: determination. The villagers thought the fire had destroyed her. They thought losing her father would break her. They thought becoming homeless would force her to give up. They were wrong. The fire had taken her home. It had taken her father. It had taken nearly everything she loved, but it had not taken her strength. And as she stood beneath the fading sunlight, Adesuwa silently made a promise. She would keep the workshop alive. She would honor her father's memory. And someday, somehow, she would build a future that would make him proud. No matter how impossible it seemed, no matter how long it took, she would rise from the ashes. 3 months had passed since the fire that changed Adesuwa's life forever. The pain of losing her father was still there. Some mornings she woke up expecting to hear his voice calling her from the workshop. Sometimes she would turn around convinced she had heard his footsteps, but reality always returned. The workshop was quiet. The chair beneath the mango tree remained empty, and the man who had once filled her world with laughter was gone. Still, Adesuwa kept moving forward. Every day she woke before sunrise. She swept the workshop floor. She arranged the tools. She repaired vehicles. She worked harder than ever. Word had spread throughout nearby villages that the mechanic in Enugu was exceptionally skilled. People traveled long distances to bring their vehicles to her. Many arrived doubtful. Most left impressed. Even those who laughed at her appearance could not deny her talent. Business was slowly improving. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a small sense of hope. Then one afternoon, everything changed. The day began like any other. The sun hung brightly over the village. Children played along the dusty roads. Women sold vegetables in the market. Farmers returned from their fields carrying baskets of cassava and yams. Adesuwa was busy replacing a damaged clutch in an old pickup truck. Sweat glistened on her forehead as she worked beneath the vehicle. Suddenly, she heard shouting in the distance. First, she ignored it. Villagers were always shouting about something, but the noise grew louder. People were gathering near the main road. Curious, Ad crawled out from beneath the truck. "What is happening?" she muttered. One of her customers laughed. "Some rich man's car has broken down." Ad shrugged. That was hardly unusual. Vehicles broke down every day. She returned to work. A few minutes later, however, a teenage boy came running toward the workshop. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he struggled to catch his breath. Adesuwa. She looked up. "What is it?" The boy pointed toward the road. "They need you." She frowned. "Who needs me?" "The rich man." "What rich man?" "The one with the expensive car." Adesuwa wiped her hands on a rag. "And?" The boy stared at her. "It's not an ordinary car." She raised an eyebrow. "Then what is it?" "A Rolls-Royce." The workshop fell silent. Even the customers nearby looked surprised. A Rolls-Royce in Enugu? That was like seeing a lion wandering through the village square. Adesuwa grabbed her toolbox. "Show me." The boy immediately led the way. As they approached the main road, She noticed a large crowd gathered around a black luxury vehicle. The car looked completely out of place among the village's mud houses and dusty roads. Children surrounded it. Adults stood nearby whispering. Everyone wanted a closer look. When Adesuwa finally reached the scene, she understood the excitement. The vehicle was magnificent. Its black exterior gleamed beneath the sunlight. Even covered in dust from the village roads, it looked expensive. Very expensive. Standing beside it was a well-dressed man in his early 30s. He wore an expensive wristwatch and a neatly tailored suit. His posture radiated confidence. This was clearly someone accustomed to success. Beside him stood a frustrated driver who appeared to be arguing with the car. The villagers pointed toward Adesuwa. That's her. The mechanic. The only mechanic in the village. The businessman turned. His eyes widened slightly. He had expected a mechanic. He had not expected Adesuwa. For a moment, neither spoke. The businessman looked at her muscular frame, grease-stained clothes, and confident expression. Adesuwa noticed his surprise immediately. She was used to that reaction. People always looked shocked. Finally, she broke the silence. You called for a mechanic. The man blinked. Then he smiled. I did. Adesuwa set down her toolbox. What seems to be the problem? The driver answered quickly. The engine suddenly lost power. We've checked everything. It won't start. Adesuwa nodded. Let's have a look. The businessman folded his arms and watched. He seemed curious, very curious. Adesuwa opened the hood. The crowd leaned forward eagerly. She examined the engine, listened carefully, checked several components. Then she asked the driver a series of questions. When did the problem begin? About 30 minutes ago. Any warning signs before then? The driver nodded. There was a strange sound. What kind of sound? He described it. Adesuwa immediately formed a theory. She continued inspecting the vehicle. A few minutes later, she smiled. I found it. The driver looked shocked. You already know? Adesuwa nodded. The businessman stepped closer. What is it? She pointed toward a damaged component. This part failed. The driver stared. That's all? Adesuwa laughed. That's enough. She opened her toolbox and got to work. The crowd watched in amazement. Many villagers had seen her repair vehicles before, but repairing a Rolls-Royce felt different. This was a machine worth more money than most of them would ever see. Yet Adesuwa worked confidently, without hesitation, without fear. The businessman couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something remarkable about the way she worked. Most mechanics he knew relied heavily on guesswork. Adesuwa relied on knowledge. Every movement seemed deliberate. Every decision seemed calculated. Nearly an hour later, she tightened the final bolt. Then she stepped back. Try it. The driver entered the vehicle. He turned the key. The engine roared to life immediately. The crowd erupted into cheers. Several villagers clapped. The driver stared at the dashboard in disbelief. It's working, Adesuwa smiled. I told you. The businessman laughed. A genuine laugh. The first he had managed all day. That's impressive. Adesuwa shrugged. It's just my job. No, he said. That was more than impressive. He extended his hand. My name is Emeka Okafor. Adesuwa hesitated briefly before shaking it. Adesuwa, it's nice to meet you. You too. Emeka glanced at the vehicle. You fix that faster than mechanics. I pay very good money in Lagos. Adesuwa smiled faintly. My father taught me well. The mention of her father caused a brief shadow to cross her face. Emeka noticed. He said nothing. Instead, he asked another question. How long have you been doing this? Since I was 12. His eyebrows rose. 12? She nodded. My father owned the workshop. And now? I run it. Emeka looked impressed. Most people would have given up after suffering the losses she clearly carried. Yet here she stood, strong, confident, independent. There was something admirable about that. The driver handed Adesuwa her payment. She accepted it politely. Normally, that would have been the end of the interaction. The customer would leave. Life would continue, but Emeka remained standing there as though he wasn't quite ready to leave. You've lived in this village your whole life? He asked. Yes. You've never considered moving? Adesuwa laughed. Moving where? The city. Lagos. He nodded. She shook her head. People like me don't move to Lagos. Emeka frowned. What does that mean? She gestured toward herself. I'm a village mechanic. You're much more than that. For a moment, Adesuwa didn't know how to respond. Very few people had ever spoken to her that way. Most focused on her appearance, her muscles, her differences, not her abilities. Emeka, however, seemed genuinely interested in her. The realization felt strange. Eventually, the driver reminded Emeka they needed to continue their journey. Reluctantly, he nodded. Then he turned back to Adesuwa. Thank you. You're welcome. He smiled. Maybe I'll see you again. Adesuwa laughed softly. In a village this small, anything is possible. A few minutes later, the Rolls-Royce disappeared down the road. The crowd slowly dispersed. Life returned to normal, but Adesuwa found herself thinking about the encounter for the rest of the day. There had been something different about Emeka. Most wealthy men she had met looked down on people like her. He hadn't. He had treated her with respect. That alone made him memorable. Meanwhile, several kilometers away, Emeka sat quietly in the back of his Rolls-Royce. His driver glanced at him through the mirror. Sir? Emeka looked up. Yes. You seem deep in thought. Emeka smiled. I am. About business? No. The mechanic? Emeka looked out the window. Images of Adesuwa flashed through his mind. The confidence, the intelligence, the determination, the quiet sadness hidden behind her eyes. He couldn't explain it, but something about her fascinated him. And for the first time in a very long time, he found himself looking forward to returning to a village he had never planned to visit again. Neither of them realized it yet, but a broken Rolls-Royce had just set their destinies on a new course, and this was only the beginning. For the next several days, life returned to normal in the village of Umudim. At least that was what Adesuwa told herself. Every morning she woke before sunrise and opened the workshop. She repaired motorcycles, pickup trucks, and old taxis that rattled loudly whenever they moved. Customers came and went. Some praised her work. Others stared at her muscles before eventually realizing she knew exactly what she was doing. But despite her busy schedule, she found herself thinking about the wealthy stranger she had met. Emeka Okafor, the owner of the Rolls-Royce. There had been something unusual about him. Most rich people she had encountered carried themselves with arrogance. They often treated villagers as if they were invisible. Emeka had been different. He had listened when she spoke. He had asked questions, and most surprisingly, he had respected her. Adesuwa wasn't sure why that mattered so much, but it did. One afternoon, she was changing the brake pads on a customer's vehicle when she heard the sound of an approaching engine. The vehicle slowed to a stop outside her workshop. She barely glanced up, then she froze. A familiar black SUV stood near the entrance. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Emeka. Adesuwa blinked twice. What are you doing here? Emeka smiled. Good afternoon to you too. She laughed despite herself. What brings you back to Umudim? He looked around casually. I was nearby. Adesuwa folded her arms. Nearby? Yes. Lagos is several hours away. Emeka chuckled. Fine. Maybe I wanted to visit. The corners of her mouth twitched. You came all this way just to visit? Is that a problem? No. Good. For reasons she couldn't explain, Adesuwa felt strangely happy. She quickly pushed the feeling aside. Emeka noticed her toolbox lying nearby. You were working. I usually am. Should I come back later? She shook her head. No. The customer whose car she was repairing suddenly grinned. I'll come back tomorrow. Before Adesuwa could protest, the man jumped into his car and drove away. Emeka laughed. I think he wanted to leave us alone. Adesuwa rolled her eyes. This village loves gossip. Every village does. For the next hour, they sat beneath the large mango tree beside the workshop. At first, the conversation felt awkward. They barely knew each other, but as time passed, the awkwardness disappeared. Emeka told her stories about Lagos, the traffic, the businesses, the endless crowds. Adesuwa listened with fascination. The farthest she had ever traveled was Enugu city. Lagos sounded like another world. You've never been? Emeka asked. She shook her head. No. You would love it. Adesuwa laughed. I doubt that. Why? Because I don't belong there. Emeka frowned. Why do you keep saying things like that? She looked away. Because it's true. No, it isn't. Adesuwa remained silent. For years, people had made her feel different, too muscular, too rough, too unusual. Eventually, she had started believing it herself. Emeka seemed determined to challenge those beliefs. "You belong anywhere you choose to belong," he said quietly. The words caught her off guard. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Eventually, she changed the subject. "Tell me about your family." Emeka smiled, and just like that, the conversation continued. When evening arrived, Emeka finally stood. "I should go." Adesuwa nodded. He hesitated, then he smiled. "I'll see you again." She laughed. "You seem very sure of that." "I am." And then he left. As his SUV disappeared down the road, Adesuwa found herself smiling, a smile she hadn't worn in a very long time. A week later, he returned. Then again the week after that. Soon his visits became a regular occurrence. Whenever Emeka arrived, the villagers noticed, and naturally they talked. The market women talked, the farmers talked, even the village elders talked. "Why does that rich man keep coming here? I heard he's interested in her. No wealthy man would want someone like Adesuwa. Then why does he keep visiting?" Nobody seemed to have an answer. Meanwhile, Adesuwa and Emeka spent more and more time together. Sometimes they sat beneath the mango tree, sometimes they walked through the village, sometimes they simply talked for hours. The friendship developed naturally. Neither of them forced it. One afternoon, Emeka arrived carrying several bags. Adesuwa looked suspicious. "What is that?" "Food." "Why?" "Because you work too much." She stared at him. And you probably forget to eat." Adesuwa laughed loudly. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" He opened one of the bags. The aroma immediately filled the workshop. Adesuwa's stomach betrayed her by growling. Emeka burst into laughter. She groaned. "Fine. I knew it." For the first time in months, the workshop echoed with genuine laughter, the kind of laughter Adesuwa had once shared with her father. And although she hated admitting it, Emeka's presence made the loneliness easier to bear. One evening, as the sun began to set, Emeka noticed an old photograph hanging inside the workshop. The frame was worn, the picture slightly faded. It showed Adesuwa and her father standing beside a repaired vehicle. Both were smiling proudly. Emeka walked closer. "That's your father?" Adesuwa nodded. For a moment, sadness crossed her face. "He taught me everything." Emeka studied the photograph. "You must miss him." The simple question broke something inside her. Most people avoided discussing her father. Perhaps they feared reopening old wounds, but the wounds had never truly closed. Adesuwa stared at the picture. Every day, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He was my family." Emeka remained silent, allowing her to continue. "When people laughed at me, he defended me." She swallowed hard. "When I doubted myself, he encouraged me." A tear escaped before she could stop it. "I still expect to see him sometimes." The admission embarrassed her. She quickly wiped her eyes, but Emeka gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "There is nothing wrong with missing someone you loved." For a moment, neither spoke. The workshop was completely silent. Then Adesuwa surprised herself. She began telling him stories. Stories about her father, the lessons he taught her, the mistakes they laughed about, the dreams they once shared. Emeka listened carefully, never interrupting, never judging, simply listening. And somehow that meant everything. When she finally finished, she felt lighter, as though she had been carrying a heavy burden alone. Emeka smiled softly. "He sounds like an incredible man." "He was, and he would be proud of you." Adesuwa looked away quickly, because hearing those words almost made her cry again. Months passed. The friendship continued growing stronger. Whenever Emeka arrived in Umudem, Adesuwa found herself looking forward to it. She would never admit that aloud, but it was true. The villagers noticed too. For the first time in years, Adesuwa seemed happy. She laughed more, smiled more, talked more. The bitterness that had settled inside her after her father's death slowly began to fade. One Saturday afternoon, Emeka accompanied her to the village market. The reaction was immediate. People stared openly. Some whispered. Others pretended not to notice. Adesuwa sighed. "They're staring. Let them stare. It's annoying." Emeka shrugged. "People always talk." She laughed. "That sounds familiar. It should." He grinned. "You're always saying the same thing." They continued walking. Several women watched them pass. Their expressions revealed a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Many of them had mocked Adesuwa for years. Now they were watching a wealthy businessman choose to spend his time with her. It didn't make sense to them, but Adesuwa no longer cared. For the first time in her life, she wasn't measuring her worth through other people's opinions. She was beginning to see herself differently, the way her father had always seen her, strong, capable, valuable. That evening, after Emeka left, Adesuwa sat alone beneath the mango tree. The workshop was quiet. The stars glittered overhead. A gentle breeze moved through the village. For a long time, she stared at the road where Emeka's vehicle had disappeared. Then she shook her head and laughed at herself. What was happening? Why did she enjoy his company so much? Why did she find herself smiling whenever he visited? Why did she miss him when he left? She didn't have answers. What she did know was this: for the first time since losing her father, she no longer felt completely alone. A friendship had entered her life when she least expected it, a friendship born from a broken Rolls-Royce, a friendship that was slowly changing both their lives. Neither Adesuwa nor Emeka realized it yet, but something deeper than friendship was quietly beginning to grow, and soon, neither of them would be able to ignore it. The friendship between Adesuwa and Emeka continued to grow over the following months. What had started with a broken Rolls-Royce had become something neither of them had expected. Emeka visited Umudim so often that villagers began joking that he should buy a house there. Whenever his SUV appeared on the dusty village road, people immediately knew where he was going, straight to Adesuwa's workshop. The gossip never stopped. Some people insisted he was secretly in love with her. Others claimed he simply felt sorry for her because she was an orphan. But Adesuwa ignored them. For the first time in years, she had someone who genuinely enjoyed her company. That alone meant more than she could explain. One bright Saturday morning, Emeka arrived earlier than usual. Adesuwa was beneath a taxi replacing a damaged exhaust pipe when she heard his voice. You know, most mechanics take weekends off. She slid out from under the vehicle and wiped grease from her face. And most mechanics aren't trying to keep their businesses alive. Emeka laughed. Fair point. He handed her a bottle of water. She accepted it gratefully. Thank you. They sat beneath the familiar mango tree while she took a short break. For a while, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable. It was the kind of silence that only existed between people who enjoyed being around each other. Eventually, Emeka looked around the workshop. His expression became thoughtful. You've done something remarkable here. Adesuwa frowned. What do you mean? Everything. He gestured around them. You lost your father. She looked down. You lost your home. She remained silent. And yet, you rebuilt your life. Adesuwa stared at the ground. Nobody ever spoke about her struggles that way. Most people focused on what she lacked. Emeka focused on what she had accomplished. There wasn't much choice, she said quietly. There is always a choice. She looked at him. You could have given up. I almost did. Emeka's expression softened. But you didn't. For a moment neither spoke. Then he asked a question that caught her completely off guard. Adesuwa, what do you want? She blinked. What? What do you want from life? She laughed awkwardly. No one has ever asked me that. I'm asking now. The question lingered between them. Adesuwa had spent so many years focused on survival that she had never allowed herself to dream. What did she want? The answer didn't come immediately. Finally, she shrugged. I don't know. Emeka waited. She thought harder. Then the words slowly emerged. I want my own workshop. His eyebrows rose. Your own? She nodded. A big one. A smile appeared on her face. The dream suddenly felt real as she described it. I want modern equipment. I want to train young people. I want girls to know they can become mechanics too. The more she spoke, the more excited she became. Emeka listened carefully. When she finished, he smiled. Those are good dreams. Adesuwa laughed bitterly. They are impossible dreams. Why? She looked around the village. Because this is my life. Emeka didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her carefully. Then he asked another question. Do you think your father wanted this life for you? Adesuwa frowned. What do you mean? Do you think he spent years teaching you mechanics so you could remain stuck here forever? The question hit harder than she expected. She had never considered it that way. Her father had always believed she was capable of more. Far more. But after his death, she had stopped imagining a bigger future. She had become comfortable surviving, comfortable staying exactly where she was. Emeka leaned forward. I think you're limiting yourself. Adesuwa crossed her arms. Easy for you to say. Why? Because you're successful. I wasn't always. She looked skeptical. Emeka smiled. When I first moved to Lagos, I slept in a room smaller than this workshop. That surprised her. You did? He nodded. I had almost nothing. What happened? I worked. He shrugged. Then I worked harder. For the next hour, he told her stories she had never heard before. Stories about failure, business mistakes, financial struggles, rejections, long nights, difficult decisions. The stories surprised her. She had always assumed wealthy people were born successful. Hearing about Emeka's struggles made him seem more human, more relatable. By the time he finished, Adesuwa felt inspired, but she still wasn't convinced. The city isn't for people like me. Emeka sighed. There you go again. What? People like me? He shook his head. You keep saying that. Because it's true. No. His voice was firm. It isn't. For a moment, silence settled between them. Then Emeka stood. He paced slowly around the workshop. Finally, he stopped in front of her. What if I could help? Adesuwa looked confused. Help with what? A fresh start. She frowned. What are you talking about? Emeka took a deep breath. Clearly, he had been thinking about this for a long time. I own a large automotive workshop in Lagos. Adesuwa nodded. He had mentioned it before. I know. I need skilled mechanics. She stared at him. A lot of people need mechanics. Not like you. The compliment made her uncomfortable. She looked away. Emeka continued. I want you to come work there. For a moment, Adesuwa thought she had misunderstood. What? I want you to move to Lagos. The words seemed impossible. Move to Lagos, leave Umwada, leave the only home she had ever known. She laughed nervously. You're joking. I'm serious. The smile disappeared from her face. You can't be serious. I am. Her heart began racing. This wasn't a casual suggestion. He genuinely meant it. Adiz, you are talented. He pointed toward the workshop. Your skills are wasted here. She immediately shook her head. No. Emeka sighed. You haven't even thought about it. I don't need to. Why? Because I can't. His expression softened. Why not? The answer came quickly. I don't have money. I know. I don't have a place to live. I know. I don't know anyone in Lagos. I know. Adize spread her hands. Then you understand why this can't happen. Instead of arguing, Emeka smiled. I already thought about that. She narrowed her eyes suspiciously. What does that mean? It means I have a solution. A feeling of uneasiness settled inside her. What solution? I'll rent you an apartment. Adize froze. The words hung in the air. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Surely she had heard wrong. What? I'll pay the rent. No. And I'll arrange the job. No, you'll have a salary. No. Adeze. No. She stood abruptly. Her heart was pounding. The offer felt overwhelming. Too generous. Too impossible. Too dangerous. People didn't do things like this. Not for strangers. Not even for friends. Emeka remained calm. I'm not asking for anything in return. That's exactly why it doesn't make sense. He smiled sadly. It makes sense to me. Adize began pacing. Part of her wanted to reject the idea immediately, but another part, a part she had buried long ago, was excited, terrified, hopeful. She hated that feeling because hope often led to disappointment. What if I fail? The question escaped before she could stop it. Emeka looked directly at her. Then you fail. She blinked. What? Everyone fails sometimes. That's your advice? Yes. He smiled. Because failure isn't what should scare you. What should scare me? Spending the rest of your life wondering what might have happened. The words struck deep. Very deep. Suddenly she imagined herself 10 years older, still living in the same workshop, still wondering about the opportunities she never took, still asking herself what could have been. The thought frightened her more than failure ever could. As evening approached, Emeka prepared to leave. Before entering his vehicle, he turned toward her. You don't have to answer today. Adiz nodded. Good. Think about it. She nodded again. Then he smiled. And whatever you decide, make sure it's your decision. With that, he climbed into his SUV and drove away. Adiz stood alone in the fading sunlight. The workshop suddenly felt smaller than before. The village seemed quieter. The future seemed larger. That night she barely slept. She sat beneath the mango tree staring at the stars. Her father's words echoed in her mind. One day you'll prove them wrong. For years she had believed her future belonged in Umudem. Now for the first time she wasn't so sure. A door had opened. A chance she had never imagined was standing before her. The question was no longer whether she was capable. The question was whether she was brave enough to walk through it. And deep inside her heart, the answer was beginning to take shape. For 3 days after Emeka's offer, Adesuwa barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined 2 different futures. In one future, she remained in Umudim. She continued repairing vehicles in her father's workshop. Life remained familiar, safe, predictable. In the other future, she moved to Lagos, a city she had never seen, a city filled with millions of strangers, a city that could either transform her life or destroy it. The choice terrified her. One evening, she sat alone beneath the mango tree beside the workshop, the same tree where she and her father had spent countless evenings talking about life, the same tree where he had encouraged her to dream bigger. As the wind rustled the leaves overhead, Adesuwa found herself staring at his old chair. The chair remained exactly where he had left it. For a moment she imagined him sitting there, smiling, listening, offering advice. "What would you do, Papa?" she whispered. The village was silent. No answer came. Yet, somehow, deep inside her heart, she already knew. Her father had never wanted fear to control her life. He had taught her to be brave, to work hard, to take opportunities when they appeared. And opportunities like this did not come often. The next morning she called Emeka. The moment he answered, she could hear excitement in his voice. "Hello, Adesuwa." She took a deep breath. "I'll do it." Silence. Then a laugh. A genuine laugh of happiness. "You mean it?" "Yes." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emeka said softly, "You won't regret it." Adesuwa hoped he was right, because there was no turning back now. The following week passed quickly. Word spread throughout Umudim that Adesuwa was leaving for Lagos. The reactions were mixed. Some villagers congratulated her. Others doubted her chances, and a few openly laughed. One afternoon, while buying supplies at the market, she overheard 2 women talking. "Lagos," one woman scoffed. "She won't last a month." The other laughed. "Not with those muscles. She'll come running back." Adesuwa simply smiled and continued walking. For the first time in her life, the insults didn't hurt. Maybe because she had something bigger to focus on, or maybe because she was finally beginning to believe in herself. On her final evening in Umuahia, she stood alone inside the workshop. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room. Her eyes moved from one corner to another. Every tool carried a memory. Every workbench reminded her of her father. Tears filled her eyes. "I wish you were here." Her voice cracked. For several minutes, she stood in silence. Then, she gently touched the old toolbox her father had used for years. "I'll make you proud." The promise felt sacred. A vow she intended to keep. The journey to Lagos took several hours. As the bus approached the city, Adesuwa stared through the window in amazement. The buildings seemed endless. The roads were packed with vehicles. People filled every corner. Everything moved so fast, so loud, so differently from Umuahia. Her heart raced. For the first time since making her decision, doubt began creeping into her mind. What was she doing? Maybe the villagers had been right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe she should have stayed home. But before the fear could overwhelm her, she spotted Emeka waiting outside the bus terminal. A smile immediately appeared on her face. He waved enthusiastically. "There she is." Adesuwa climbed down from the bus carrying her bags. Emeka helped her with the luggage. "Welcome to Lagos." She looked around. The city felt enormous. "I think I'm already lost." Emeka laughed. "That's normal." As they drove through the city, Adesuwa stared out the window like a child seeing the world for the first time. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky. Traffic filled every road. Street vendors moved between vehicles. The energy felt endless. Nothing in Umwada had prepared her for this. Eventually, they arrived at a modest apartment building. Emeka parked the car. "We're here." Adesuwa followed him upstairs. When he opened the door, she froze. The apartment wasn't luxurious, but it was beautiful. There was a living room, kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom. Everything was clean and modern. For a moment she couldn't speak. "This is for me?" Emeka nodded. Tears immediately filled her eyes. No one had ever done something so kind for her before. "It's too much." "No." He smiled. "It's exactly what you deserve." Adesuwa turned away quickly so he wouldn't see her crying, but he noticed anyway and pretended not to. 2 days later, Adesuwa started work at Emeka's automotive workshop. The facility was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was enormous. Multiple repair bays stretched across the building. Modern equipment filled every corner. Dozens of mechanics moved around repairing vehicles. Luxury cars lined the parking area. Adesuwa felt completely overwhelmed. The moment she stepped inside, conversation stopped. People stared. Exactly the way villagers had stared. A young mechanic whispered to his friend, "That's the new worker?" His friend laughed. "Looks like she could lift a car." Several others chuckled. Adesuwa pretended not to hear. She was used to it. Emeka gathered the workers. "This is Adesuwa." The mechanics nodded politely. A few looked skeptical. One older mechanic folded his arms. "Can she actually do the work?" The question filled the room with tension. Emeka looked irritated, but before he could respond, Adesuwa stepped forward. "Give me something to fix." The older mechanic smirked. "Confident?" She shrugged. "Just practical." The mechanic pointed toward a luxury SUV. "The engine problem has been confusing everyone." Adesuwa walked toward the vehicle. The workshop watched closely. Many expected her to fail. She could feel their eyes following her. Instead of becoming nervous, she focused on the engine, listening, observing, analyzing. Within 20 minutes, she identified the problem. Within an hour, she fixed it. When the engine started successfully, the entire workshop fell silent. The older mechanic stared at her, then he laughed. Not mockingly, respectfully. "Well," he nodded. "I stand corrected." For the first time, Adesuwa saw admiration in their eyes. Not judgment, not pity, respect. And it felt incredible. Over the following weeks, her reputation grew rapidly. Customers began requesting her specifically. Her diagnostic skills impressed everyone. Even mechanics with years of experience sought her advice. One afternoon, a frustrated customer arrived with a vehicle that several workshops had failed to repair. The problem had persisted for months. Within a few hours, Adesuwa solved it. The customer was amazed. Word spread quickly. Soon more people were asking for the lady mechanic. At first, many arrived expecting a gimmick. Then they saw her work, and they left impressed. For the first time in her life, Adesuwa was being recognized primarily for her skill, not her appearance, not her muscles, her talent. It was everything she had ever wanted. Meanwhile, Emeka continued checking on her regularly. Sometimes they had lunch together. Sometimes they discussed business. Sometimes they simply talked. The friendship remained strong, stronger than ever. One evening, they sat at a small restaurant overlooking the city. Lights sparkled across the skyline. Adesuwa smiled. "I still can't believe this is my life." Emeka looked at her. "You earned it." "No." She shook her head. "You helped me." "I opened a door." He smiled. "You walked through it." Adesuwa laughed. "You always have an answer." "I own businesses." He grinned. "It's part of the job." She laughed harder. For a moment, neither noticed the woman sitting across the restaurant watching them. A beautiful woman dressed in expensive clothing. A woman whose expression darkened every time Emeka smiled at Adesuwa. Her name was Vanessa, and she was Emeka's girlfriend. She had heard about Adesuwa before. First, she hadn't been worried. But now, watching them together, she felt something dangerous growing inside her. Jealousy. And jealousy has a way of turning even small problems into disasters. As Adesuwa and Emeka laughed together beneath the city lights, neither of them realized that trouble was already approaching, and Vanessa was about to make their lives far more complicated. Vanessa could not stop thinking about Adesuwa. For weeks, she had tried to convince herself that she was overreacting. After all, Emeka had many friends. He met countless people through his businesses. There was no reason to feel threatened by one mechanic from a village in Enugu. At least, that was what she kept telling herself. But the more she thought about it, the less she believed it. Whenever she called Emeka, he seemed distracted. Whenever she asked about his day, Adesuwa's name somehow entered the conversation. Whenever she visited his office, she noticed him smiling at messages on his phone, and more often than not, those messages were from Adesuwa. Vanessa hated it. She hated how easily Adesuwa occupied Emeka's attention. She hated how often he spoke about her. Most of all, she hated the way his face lit up whenever her name was mentioned. One evening, Vanessa sat across from Emeka at an expensive restaurant. Soft music played in the background. Waiters moved between tables. Everything should have felt romantic. Instead, Vanessa felt irritated. Emeka was talking about a customer whose vehicle had been repaired earlier that day. Adesuwa figured it out in less than 20 minutes. Vanessa nearly dropped her fork. There it was again. Adesuwa, Adesuwa, Adesuwa. She forced a smile. She sounds very talented. Emeka nodded immediately. She's incredible. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Is she? Absolutely. He laughed. You should see her work. The conversation continued, but Vanessa barely listened. A dangerous thought had begun growing inside her mind. For the first time, she wondered whether Emeka cared about Adesuwa more than he realized. And if that was true, she needed to do something. Fast. The following week, Vanessa decided she wanted to meet Adesuwa. Not because she genuinely cared, because she wanted answers. One afternoon, she arrived unexpectedly at Emeka's workshop. The mechanics immediately noticed her. Vanessa was beautiful, elegant, confident. She carried herself like someone accustomed to getting whatever she wanted. The receptionist greeted her politely. Good afternoon. I'm looking for Adesuwa. The receptionist pointed toward one of the repair bays. Vanessa turned, and for the first time she saw her rival. Adesuwa stood beside a luxury SUV discussing an engine problem with several mechanics. Her hands were covered in grease. She wore overalls. Her muscular arms were visible beneath rolled-up sleeves. Several workers listened carefully as she spoke. The respect they showed her surprised Vanessa. This wasn't what she expected. She had imagined someone awkward, someone rough, someone easy to dismiss. Instead, she found someone confident, someone respected, someone who clearly belonged there. The realization made her even more uncomfortable. Vanessa approached slowly. Adesuwa looked up. Can I help you? For a moment, Vanessa simply stared. Then she forced a smile. You must be Adesuwa. Adesuwa nodded. And you are? Vanessa. The name immediately sounded familiar. Emeka had mentioned her before, his girlfriend. A small feeling of unease settled inside Adesuwa's stomach. It's nice to meet you. Vanessa smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. Is it? The question caught Adesuwa's off guard. What do you mean? Vanessa folded her arms. I think you know exactly what I mean. Several mechanics exchanged uncomfortable glances. The tension was obvious. Adesuwa remained calm. I don't. Vanessa laughed. A cold laugh. Please. Her voice grew sharper. Let's not pretend. Adesuwa stared at her. The workshop had become completely silent. Every worker nearby was listening. Vanessa took another step forward. You spend a lot of time with my boyfriend. The accusation hung in the air. Adesuwa immediately understood what was happening, and she hated it. She had spent her entire life being judged unfairly. She wasn't about to start arguing now. Emeka is my friend, Vanessa scoffed. Friend? Yes, that's all. Adesuwa nodded. That's all. Vanessa didn't believe her. Not for a second. Weeks of jealousy had already convinced her otherwise. You expect me to believe that? I don't expect anything. The answer only made Vanessa angrier. She had come looking for a confrontation, but Adesuwa refused to give her one. You know what I think? Adesuwa sighed. No, I think you've been using him. Several mechanics looked shocked. Adesuwa remained surprisingly calm. Using him? Yes. Vanessa gestured around the workshop. He got you this job. He got you an apartment. He changed your life. Adesuwa felt her patience beginning to wear thin. Your point? My point is simple. Vanessa's voice rose. You've gotten too comfortable. Now everyone in the workshop was openly staring. Adesuwa hated public drama, especially this kind. She lowered her voice. Vanessa, I think we should discuss this somewhere else. No. Vanessa took another step forward. We'll discuss it right here. The entire workshop seemed to hold its breath. One mechanic quietly slipped away and called Emeka. Across the city, Emeka was attending a meeting when his phone rang. The moment he answered, concern filled his face. What happened? The mechanic quickly explained. Emeka stood immediately. His chair nearly fell backward. I'm on my way. Without another word, he rushed from the room. Back at the workshop, The situation continued escalating. Vanessa's jealousy had completely taken over. Months of insecurity were finally exploding. Meanwhile, Adesuwa struggled to remain calm. "I have never disrespected your relationship." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Really?" "Yes. You expect me to believe that?" Adesuwa's jaw tightened. For the first time, anger appeared in her eyes. "Believe whatever you want." The response stunned Vanessa. She wasn't accustomed to people standing up to her. Most people backed down. Adesuwa didn't, and somehow that made her even angrier. "You think you're special because you're good at fixing cars?" The insult echoed through the workshop. Adesuwa looked directly at her. "No. Then why does Emeka spend so much time with you?" The question wasn't really for Adesuwa. It was for Vanessa herself, a question she desperately wanted answered. Unfortunately, Adesuwa didn't know the answer either. Not entirely. Yes, she cared about Emeka deeply, but she had never acted on those feelings. She had never crossed any boundaries, and she certainly wasn't responsible for Vanessa's insecurities. Before she could respond, the workshop doors opened. Emeka rushed inside. His eyes immediately found Vanessa, then Adesuwa. Relief flooded him when he realized neither appeared hurt. "What is going on?" Vanessa turned toward him. "Perfect timing. Ask her." Emeka sighed. "I'm asking you." Vanessa folded her arms. "She knows exactly what's happening." "No," Emeka said firmly. "You know exactly what's happening." The room fell silent. Vanessa stared at him. Clearly she had expected support. Instead, she found disappointment. "You're defending her?" Emeka shook his head. "I'm defending common sense." Vanessa looked hurt, then angry, then hurt again. The emotions flashed across her face rapidly. "You always defend her." The accusation struck deeper than Emeka expected, because there was some truth in it. He did defend Adesuwa, often, perhaps more often than he realized. The thought unsettled him. Vanessa noticed the hesitation and misinterpreted it immediately. Her expression hardened. Without another word, she turned and stormed toward the exit. "Vanessa!" She didn't stop. Moments later, she disappeared. The workshop remained silent. Nobody knew what to say. Eventually, Emeka rubbed his forehead. Everyone back to work. The mechanics quickly scattered. Within minutes, only Emeka and Adesuwa remained. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Adesuwa broke the silence. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." She looked away. "This is my fault." "No." His voice was firm. "It isn't." Adesuwa sighed. "She hates me." Emeka shook his head. "She doesn't know you. Apparently, she doesn't need to." For the first time, Emeka looked troubled. Very troubled. Because deep down, he knew the confrontation wasn't really about Adesuwa. It was about something larger, something neither he nor Vanessa had wanted to acknowledge. Their relationship had been struggling for months. The jealousy was only a symptom, not the cause, and now the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. As evening approached, Adesuwa returned to work, but the incident stayed with her. Something had changed. The friendship between her and Emeka no longer felt simple. Too many emotions had become tangled together. Too many questions remained unanswered. Meanwhile, across the city, Vanessa sat alone in her apartment. Anger burned inside her. Humiliation burned even stronger. In her mind, Adesuwa had taken something from her, and she wasn't prepared to let that go. Not yet. The confrontation at the workshop was over, but the real trouble was only beginning. And before long, a shocking betrayal would change everything for all three of them. The confrontation at the workshop left a shadow over everything. For days afterward, Adesuwa found herself replaying the incident in her mind. No matter how hard she tried to focus on work, Vanessa's words kept returning. "You spend a lot of time with my boyfriend. You think you're special? You've gotten too comfortable." Adesuwa hated conflict. She had spent most of her life avoiding unnecessary drama. Growing up in Umedem had taught her that people often judged her before getting to know her. The last thing she wanted was to become the reason for problems in someone else's relationship. One evening after work, she sat alone in her apartment staring through the window. The lights of Lagos sparkled in the distance. Normally, she loved the view. Tonight, she barely noticed it. A knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, Emeka stood outside. His expression looked tired. Very tired. "Can I come in?" Adesuwa stepped aside. Of course. He entered slowly and sat on the couch. For several moments neither spoke. Then Emeka sighed heavily. I'm sorry. Adesuwa frowned. For what? For what happened at the workshop? She shook her head. You don't need to apologize. Yes, I do. He rubbed his forehead. You shouldn't have been dragged into that. Adesuwa sat across from him. For the first time she noticed how exhausted he looked. The confident businessman she had come to know seemed burdened, troubled. What happened after she left? Adesuwa asked quietly. Emeka leaned back. We argued. The answer wasn't surprising. What about now? Another long sigh. I don't know. The uncertainty in his voice concerned her. Emeka had always seemed like someone who knew exactly what he wanted. Now he sounded lost. Adesuwa. He hesitated, then continued. Have you ever stayed in something because it felt easier than leaving? The question caught her off guard. She thought about it carefully, then nodded. Yes. What happened? She smiled sadly. The workshop. Emeka looked confused. My father's workshop. She folded her arms. After he died, I stayed because it was familiar. The memory still hurt. I was scared of anything else. Understanding appeared on Emeka's face. Until you came to Lagos. Exactly. For a moment neither spoke. Then Emeka looked away. I think that's what I've been doing. The realization seemed painful. Adesuwa understood immediately. He wasn't talking about Lagos. He was talking about Vanessa. The relationship, the life they had built together, the future they had planned, and perhaps the future that no longer existed. Over the next 2 weeks, things became increasingly tense between Emeka and Vanessa. Their arguments grew more frequent. Every conversation somehow led back to Adesuwa. Vanessa couldn't let it go. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that Adesuwa was the problem. One Friday evening, she arrived unexpectedly at Emeka's house. The moment he opened the door, she began arguing. You were with her again today. Emeka sighed. I was at work, and she works there. Vanessa. No. She pointed at him. Don't pretend nothing is happening. Emeka's patience was wearing thin. Nothing is happening. Then why do you defend her? The question hung in the air. Emeka remained silent. Not because he didn't have an answer. Because he wasn't sure how to explain it. Adesuwa was his friend. Someone he respected deeply. Someone who had earned everything through hard work. Of course, he defended her. But the more he tried explaining that, the less Vanessa seemed willing to listen. Eventually she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Emeka stood alone in his living room. Exhaustion washed over him. For the first time, he began wondering whether the relationship could survive. Meanwhile, Adesuwa focused on her work. Business at the workshop was thriving. Customers requested her constantly. Her reputation continued growing throughout Lagos. For the first time in her life, she felt truly successful. Yet despite everything, she worried about Emeka. Whenever they spoke, she could hear the strain in his voice. One afternoon, she finally addressed it. You don't seem happy. Emeka looked surprised. What makes you say that? You smile less. He laughed softly. That's your evidence? It's enough. The smile quickly faded. Neither mentioned Vanessa directly. Neither needed to. The problem was obvious. As much as Adesuwa cared about him, she knew this wasn't a situation she could fix. Some decisions had to be made alone. Several days later, Emeka received a message from Vanessa. It was brief. We need to talk. Normally, he would have delayed the conversation. This time, he agreed immediately. Perhaps because part of him hoped they could finally resolve things. Perhaps because another part of him feared what was coming. They arranged to meet at her apartment the following evening. The entire day felt strange, heavy, as though something important was about to happen. By late afternoon, Emeka finished work and headed toward Vanessa's apartment. Traffic was lighter than usual. The journey took less time than expected. When he arrived, he noticed something odd. A vehicle was parked outside, one he recognized immediately. His best friend Tunji's car. Emeka frowned. What was Tunji doing there? At first, he assumed it was coincidence. Perhaps Tunji was visiting another resident. Perhaps he had stopped by briefly. But a small feeling of unease settled inside him. He couldn't explain why. He walked toward the building. The uneasy feeling grew stronger. When he reached the apartment door, he noticed something else. Silence. No television, no music, nothing. He pulled out the spare key Vanessa had given him months earlier. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he unlocked the door. The apartment was dimly lit. Vanessa? No answer. He stepped inside. The living room was empty. His heart began beating faster. Vanessa? Still nothing. Then he heard something. A voice. A man's voice coming from the bedroom. Emeka froze. The voice sounded familiar. Very familiar. Slowly he walked down the hallway. Every step felt heavier than the last. The closer he got, the louder the voices became. Then came laughter. His stomach tightened. Suddenly he knew, or at least part of him knew, but he didn't want to believe it. Not until he saw it himself. Finally he reached the bedroom door. His hand trembled slightly. Then he pushed it open. Time seemed to stop. Vanessa was sitting on the bed. Beside her sat Tund, his best friend, the man he had trusted for years. The room fell silent instantly. Vanessa's face turned pale. Tund jumped to his feet. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The shock was overwhelming. Emeka stared at them, trying to process what he was seeing, trying to convince himself there was another explanation. But there wasn't. The truth was obvious. Pain spread through his chest. Not anger, not yet. Pain, deep crushing pain. Tund stepped forward. Emeka, wait, don't. The single word stopped him immediately. Vanessa stood. Please let me explain. Emeka laughed, a short, bitter laugh. Explain what? Neither answered because there was nothing left to explain. Everything was already clear. The arguments, the accusations, the jealousy, all of it. Vanessa had spent months accusing him of betrayal while hiding her own. The irony would have been amusing. For the first time in years, he felt completely disconnected from someone he once considered family. Don't insult my intelligence. Silence followed. Heavy silence. Vanessa began crying, but the tears changed nothing. The trust was gone, completely gone. Finally, Emeka turned toward the door. Emeka. Vanessa's voice cracked. He stopped briefly, not because he was reconsidering, because he wanted to say one final thing. Without turning around, he spoke. We're done. The words were calm, quiet, final. Then he walked away. Outside, night had fallen. The city lights blurred through his vision. For several minutes he sat alone inside his car, unable to move, unable to think. The betrayal hurt more than he expected. Not just Vanessa, Tund, his best friend. That wound cut even deeper. Eventually he started the engine, but instead of driving home, he simply sat there, thinking, reflecting, remembering, and somewhere among those thoughts, another realization slowly emerged. A realization he had been avoiding for months. His relationship with Vanessa had ended long before tonight. Tonight had merely revealed the truth. As he stared through the windshield, one image kept appearing in his mind. Not Vanessa, not Tund, Adis, the woman who had never lied to him, never manipulated him, never betrayed his trust. The woman who had stood beside him through every challenge, the woman who understood him better than almost anyone else. For the first time, Emeka allowed himself to ask a question he had been avoiding for months. What if his feelings for Adis were no longer just friendship? And for the first time, he wasn't sure he could deny the answer. The betrayal had shattered one chapter of his life, but without realizing it, it had also opened the door to another. The weeks following Emeka's breakup with Vanessa were difficult, much more difficult than he expected. Although he knew ending the relationship had been the right decision, the betrayal still hurt. Losing Vanessa was painful. Losing Tunde was even worse. For years, Tunde had been more than a friend. He had been like a brother, someone Emeka trusted without question. Now that trust was gone. Some wounds heal quickly, others leave scars. This one left both. At first, Emeka threw himself into work. He spent long hours in meetings, visited project sites, reviewed business reports, did everything possible to keep his mind occupied. But no matter how busy he became, his thoughts always seemed to return to the same person. At least, the realization unsettled him. Not because he disliked it, because he finally understood what it meant. The feelings he had been dismissing as friendship had quietly grown into something deeper, something stronger, something impossible to ignore. Yet he said nothing. The last thing he wanted was to complicate Adesuwa's life, especially after everything she had already endured. So he remained silent, at least for a while. Meanwhile, Adesuwa noticed the change in him immediately. She could see the sadness hiding behind his smiles, the exhaustion behind his eyes. The betrayal had affected him deeply. One afternoon after work, she found him sitting alone outside the workshop. The mechanics had already gone home. The parking lot was nearly empty. Emeka sat quietly on a bench staring at the sunset. Without speaking, Adesuwa walked over and sat beside him. For several moments, neither said anything. The silence felt familiar, comfortable. Eventually, Emeka smiled faintly. "You always know when something is wrong." Adesuwa shrugged. "You're easy to read." "I am not. You are." He laughed softly. For the first time that day, the sadness seemed to lift slightly. "I'm serious," she continued. "You smile differently now." Emeka shook his head. "See? Easy to read." He laughed again, this time a little louder. The sound made Adesuwa happy. She had missed hearing him laugh. For a while, they simply watched the sun disappear beyond the city skyline. Then Emeka spoke. "Thank you," Adesuwa frowned. "For what?" "For being here." The words touched her more than he realized. Because if she was being honest, there was nowhere else she wanted to be. Over the next several months, life slowly improved. The pain of betrayal faded little by little. Work at the automotive workshop continued thriving, and Adesuwa's reputation grew larger than ever. Customers now traveled from different parts of Lagos specifically to see her. Some came because they had heard stories. Others came because previous customers recommended her. Many left amazed. One afternoon, a wealthy businessman arrived with a luxury vehicle that multiple mechanics had failed to repair. Adesuwa diagnosed the issue within an hour. The grateful customer shook her hand repeatedly. "You saved me weeks of frustration." The story spread quickly. Soon her name became known throughout automotive circles in Lagos. The success felt surreal. Sometimes she still remembered sleeping alone inside her father's workshop after the fire. Back then, she had worried about surviving another week. Now she was becoming one of the most respected mechanics in the city. If only her father could see her now. The thought often brought tears to her eyes. One Saturday evening, Emeka invited Adesuwa to dinner. Nothing unusual about that. They had shared countless meals together, but this evening felt different. Even before they arrived at the restaurant, Adesuwa sensed something. Emeka seemed nervous. Very nervous, which was strange. Confidence usually followed him everywhere. Yet tonight he seemed distracted, lost in thought. As they sat overlooking the Lagos waterfront, Adesuwa finally asked, "What's wrong?" Emeka looked up. "Nothing." She raised an eyebrow. "You're a terrible liar." He laughed. "That obvious?" "Very." For a moment he considered telling her the truth, then changed his mind. Not yet. Instead, they talked about work, about future plans, about life. Hours passed. Neither wanted the evening to end. Eventually they left the restaurant and walked along the waterfront. The ocean breeze felt cool against their skin. The city lights reflected beautifully across the water. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Emeka suddenly stopped walking. Adesuwa turned toward him. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. There was no perfect moment, no perfect speech, no perfect way to say what he needed to say. Only honesty and courage. The same courage he had once encouraged her to find. Adesuwa. Something in his voice made her heart race. Yes. Emeka looked directly into her eyes. The world around them seemed to disappear. The sounds of traffic, the waves, the city lights, none of it mattered anymore. Only this moment, only this conversation. "You changed my life." The words caught her completely off guard. "What?" He smiled softly. "I'm serious." She stared at him, unsure where this was leading. "When my car broke down in Umadem, I thought it was the worst day of my week." A laugh escaped her. "I remember. It turned out to be one of the best." Her heart began beating faster, much faster. Emeka continued. "I met someone extraordinary." Adesuwa immediately looked away, embarrassed, uncomfortable, yet strangely happy. "You don't have to say all that." "Yes, I do." His voice remained gentle. "But, Adesuwa." She looked back at him and the expression in his eyes stole her breath. There was no uncertainty there, no confusion, only sincerity, only truth. For a moment neither spoke. Then Emeka finally said the words he had been carrying inside him for months. "I love you." Everything seemed to stop. The wind, the ocean, time itself. Adesuwa simply stared at him, certain she had heard incorrectly. What? A small smile appeared on his face. I love you. Her heart nearly exploded. For months she had buried her feelings, hidden them, ignored them, convinced herself they could never become reality. And now the man she loved was standing in front of her saying the words she had dreamed about hearing. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Emeka's smile faded slightly. Concern appeared on his face. If you don't feel the same. Before he could finish, Adesuwa laughed through her tears, then shook her head. You idiot. Emeka blinked. What? She laughed again, a beautiful laugh filled with relief. I've loved you for months. This time Emeka was the one left speechless. For several seconds neither moved, then both started laughing. The situation felt almost ridiculous. Two people who loved each other, both too afraid to admit it, both waiting for the other person to speak first. Finally, Emeka stepped closer, very carefully, as though afraid the moment might disappear. Really? Adesuwa smiled. Really? The joy on his face was impossible to miss. For the first time in a very long time, Emeka felt completely happy. Not successful, not accomplished. Happy. There was a difference. And Adesuwa felt it too. Their relationship developed naturally after that. Nothing felt forced. Nothing felt rushed. Because the foundation had already been built. Months of friendship, trust, respect, understanding. They already knew each other's strengths and weaknesses. They already knew each other's dreams and fears. Love simply grew from everything they had already created together. For the first time in her life, Adesuwa felt truly seen. Not as the muscular girl villagers mocked, not as the orphan who lost everything, not as the mechanic people underestimated, simply as herself, and Emeka loved her exactly as she was. Meanwhile, Emeka discovered something equally important. The best relationships weren't built on appearances or status or convenience. They were built on trust. And nobody had ever earned his trust the way Adesuwa had. Several months later, they visited Umudim together. The village was shocked. People stared openly. Whispers spread everywhere. The same villagers who once mocked Adesuwa now watched her step out of a luxury vehicle beside one of Lagos's most successful businessmen. But Adesuwa wasn't interested in proving anyone wrong. She had outgrown that need. Instead, she walked directly to her father's grave. Emeka followed quietly. For several moments, she stood in silence. The wind moved gently through the surrounding trees. Tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sadness, tears of gratitude. Slowly, she knelt beside the grave. Papa, she whispered. A smile appeared on her face. I think you'd like him. Emeka stood nearby, giving her space. But hearing those words touched him deeply because he knew exactly what they meant. The girl who had once lost everything had finally found happiness. The journey had been long, painful, unexpected, but somehow every step had led her here, to love, to success, to a future brighter than she had ever imagined. And although neither of them knew it yet, an even more beautiful chapter was about to begin. One that would end with wedding bells, joyful tears, and a promise to spend forever together. A year passed faster than either Adesuwa or Emeka expected. It had been a year filled with growth, healing, and happiness. For Adesuwa, it sometimes felt unbelievable. There were still mornings when she woke up and had to remind herself that this was real. The small apartment she once moved into had become a beautiful home. The lonely village mechanic who had slept on a mattress inside a workshop now managed one of the most respected automotive teams in Lagos. And the man she had once secretly loved from a distance now loved her openly and completely. Life had changed in ways she never imagined. One evening, shortly after returning from work, Adesuwa found Emeka waiting in the living room. A strange smile sat on his face. The kind of smile that usually meant he was planning something. Adesuwa narrowed her eyes. What are you up to? Emeka laughed. Why do you always assume I'm planning something? Because you usually are. He stood. Come with me. Where? You'll see. 20 minutes later they arrived at a beautiful garden overlooking the Lagos waterfront. The place was quiet, elegant, decorated with lights that shimmered beneath the evening sky. Adesuwa looked around suspiciously. Why are we here? Emeka didn't answer immediately. Instead, he led her toward a small wooden platform surrounded by flowers. Then he stopped. For a moment neither spoke. The ocean breeze drifted around them. The city lights sparkled in the distance. Finally, Emeka took a deep breath and dropped to one knee. Adesuwa froze. Her eyes widened. Her hands flew to her mouth. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. The man she loved smiled up at her. Adesuwa. His voice trembled slightly. For perhaps the first time in his life, Emeka looked nervous. I spent years searching for success. Tears immediately filled Adesuwa's eyes. I built businesses. He smiled softly. I made money. The tears spilled down her cheeks. But none of that compares to finding you. Adesuwa began crying openly now. The kind of tears that come from overwhelming happiness. You changed my life. Emeka removed a small ring box from his pocket. You showed me what strength looks like. He opened the box. A beautiful diamond ring sparkled beneath the lights. You showed me what loyalty looks like. His voice grew softer. And you taught me that the greatest blessings often arrive disguised as problems. A laugh escaped through Adesuwa's tears. They both knew exactly what he meant. The broken Rolls-Royce, the moment that had changed everything. Emeka smiled. Adesuwa chukurdi. She cried even harder. Will you marry me? For a moment she couldn't speak. Words refused to come. She simply nodded repeatedly, then finally managed to say, yes. Emeka laughed with relief. Yes, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. As they embraced, applause erupted around them. Adesuwa looked up in surprise. Friends and coworkers suddenly emerged from nearby hiding places. Several mechanics cheered loudly. Others clapped. Some even whistled. Adesuwa laughed through her tears. It was one of the happiest moments of her life. Wedding preparations began almost immediately and quickly became chaotic. Very chaotic. Between work responsibilities and wedding plans, both Adesuwa and Emeka found themselves constantly busy. One evening, Adesuwa sat surrounded by wedding catalogs. Her head hurt, her eyes hurt, everything hurt. Emeka walked into the room carrying food. You look stressed. Adesuwa glared at him. I have looked at flowers for 4 hours. Emeka laughed. That bad? Every flower looks the same. He wisely chose not to respond. The wedding planning continued for months. Family members became involved. Friends offered opinions. Co-workers made suggestions. Everyone seemed excited. Eventually the big day arrived. The wedding was held in Enugu, more specifically, near the village where Adesuwa's journey had begun. Word spread quickly throughout Umwidum, and the villagers could hardly believe it. The same young woman they had mocked for years was marrying one of the most successful businessmen in Lagos. Many traveled long distances to attend. Others simply wanted to witness the event with their own eyes. The church filled quickly. Beautiful decorations lined the entrance. Music echoed through the air. Guests smiled and chatted excitedly. Among them were people who once doubted Adesuwa, people who once laughed at her appearance, people who had insisted she would never find happiness. Now they watched in stunned silence. Life had proven them wrong, completely wrong. Inside a preparation room, Adesuwa stood before a mirror. Her wedding gown fit perfectly. The elegant white dress highlighted her beauty without hiding who she was. She was still strong, still muscular, still proudly herself, and she had never looked more beautiful. A tear rolled down her cheek. One of her friends noticed. Nervous? Adesuwa smiled. A little. The friend squeezed her hand. Your father would be proud. The words nearly broke her. For a moment she closed her eyes and imagined him standing beside her, smiling, laughing, telling her everything would be fine. The thought filled her heart with warmth. Meanwhile, Emeka waited nervously inside the church. Several guests laughed at how restless he seemed. One mechanic shook his head. I've never seen him this nervous. Another laughed. He looks like he's about to repair an engine with no tools. The jokes only made Emeka more anxious. Then the music changed. The church doors opened and everything else disappeared. Adesuwa stepped inside. For a moment the entire room seemed frozen. She looked breathtaking. The confident mechanic who had once walked through village roads carrying heavy engine parts now walked gracefully toward the altar. Emeka felt tears sting his eyes. He didn't even try hiding them because in that moment nothing else mattered. Only her. Adesuwa reached the altar. Their eyes met and both smiled. The ceremony began. Vows were exchanged. Promises were made. Tears were shed. Laughter echoed through the church. Finally, the officiating minister smiled. You may kiss your bride. The church erupted into applause. Cheers filled the room, and as Emeka kissed Adesuwa, years of struggle seemed to fade away. All the pain, all the loss, all the loneliness had led them here, to this moment, to each other. The celebration lasted late into the night. Music filled the reception hall. Guests danced happily. Food was served. Stories were shared. At one point, several villagers approached Adesuwa. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked emotional. One elderly woman lowered her head. "We treated you badly." Adesuwa looked surprised. The woman continued, "We judged you." Several others nodded. "We're sorry." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Adesuwa smiled, a genuine smile. Years ago, she might have held on to resentment. Years ago, she might have wanted revenge. But she had learned something important. Carrying bitterness only creates more pain. "I forgive you." The villagers looked relieved, and Adesuwa meant every word because she no longer needed their approval. She had already found something far more valuable: self-worth. Months after the wedding, Adesuwa and Emeka launched a new project together, a large automotive training center. The center focused on teaching young people mechanical skills, especially women. Many people doubted the idea, just as they once doubted Adesuwa, but she didn't care. She knew exactly what it felt like to be underestimated, and she wanted others to have opportunities she never had. Within 1 year, hundreds of students had enrolled in Adesuwa's training center. Some graduated and found good jobs. Others opened workshops of their own. Every student who walked through those doors carried the same thing Adesuwa had once needed most: a chance. The center became one of her proudest achievements, not because it made her respected, but because it gave other young people the courage to believe their lives could become bigger than the judgment of a small village. Years later, Adesuwa and Emeka sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and orange. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was peaceful, comfortable, and full of everything they had survived. Then Emeka smiled. "Can you believe all of this started with a broken Rolls-Royce?" Adesuwa laughed softly. "It still sounds ridiculous." "Maybe," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "But I'm grateful for it." She rested her head against him. "So am I." The woman once mocked by an entire village had found success, purpose, love, and something even more powerful: confidence in who she truly was. She no longer carried the insults of the past like wounds. She had finally learned that her worth was never decided by the people who laughed at her. It was decided by what she chose to believe about herself. And at last, Adesuwa believed what her father had always known. She was strong. She was capable. She was enough. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Adesuwa smiled with quiet peace. The future was bright, and for the first time in her life, she knew she deserved every bit of happiness she had found.